Good afternoon, and welcome to the Forest Readers Program. I'm Phil Baer, and
I'm Ellen Baer.
we're going to be your readers today for this session of the program. You may have heard us read in the past, and we've always read from our own essays, but we decided that something in a lighter vein might be welcome in these difficult times of the COVID epidemic. So we're going to be reading from a slim volume called The Capers Papers, and written by Charlotte Capers, and Ellen is going to introduce Charlotte and read the first selection from the book.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in to hear us read from a book you've never heard of, written by a person you've probably never heard of. But Charlotte was one of the most fun people I knew in my childhood, and so we think this is going to be fun. To tell you more about Charlotte, I need to tell you more about my childhood. I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi in the 1950s, and my mother had a lot of friends, many of whom I've forgotten completely. But her three best friends were unforgettable. So I'm glad to tell you that they were Eudora Welty, well-known writer, Lynn Malone, the first female pediatrician in the state of Mississippi, and Charlotte Capers. Charlotte worked at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, and that was a prestigious position at the time, and even now. But she also wrote a column in the daily newspaper. It was a weekly column that came out on Sunday, and so I always read the Sunday paper just so I wouldn't miss Charlotte's column. It was called Misquote. So most of these pieces are from the Jackson Daily News. And just to tell you, give you a flavor for it, I'm going to read what Eudora wrote in her prologue to the Capers Papers. Most of the pieces were written to amuse, and they abundantly do so. If some of them are fleeting, so was and so is the passing scene. The point is that Charlotte caught something. Her perceptions are not only quick and bright, but accurate and wise. She knows her world. And for the many years of my childhood, and for Phil and me after we moved to Jackson, Mississippi in the early 60s, after college and after marriage, so that Phil could do his graduate studies at Ole Miss Medical Center, we knew that world too. And it's a pleasure for us to go back and revisit it and to take you along. So the first thing I'm going to read is called There Go the Joneses. The Joneses are hard people to keep up with. Time was when they entertained their friends in the family dining room with fried chicken, rice and gravy, peas and mushrooms, hot biscuits, and ice cream with chocolate sauce. That was company dinner. This pattern persisted until someone noticed the beauties of nature, and almost simultaneously, scientists dealt death to night-flying insects with the discovery of DDT. Forthwith, the Joneses, long an indoor group, moved outdoors. The move involved outdoor furniture, which in the beginning of the patio phase was rustic, and a great deal of marching back and forth bearing potato salad occurred. To eliminate the marching, barbecue pits sprung up like mushrooms, and a great deal of marching back and forth bearing burgers took place. About now, the Boston cookbook went out the window, and the garden vegetables stayed underground. Casseroles bloomed into prominence, and new sets of bright-colored crockery sounded the knell for Mother's Haviland china. The old boiled dinner became a memory, and if the entree wasn't roped on the last roundup, skewered and thrown bodily into a blazing fire, the party was dull. Holes were dug in which to cook corn in its shuck and clams in their shells, and the whole affair began to look like home on the range. At this approximate point, someone went to California and brought back the word that patios had there attained a suave peak of perfection. Outdoor furniture became smarter, more functional, more expensive. African camp chairs appeared to supplant the old Morris chair, and wrought iron began its insidious grip on the furniture industry. Now a whole new wardrobe was involved in the patio party, and Mother laid aside her good crepe dress and stumbled into loafers. Father, normally in Oxford gray, got into the spirit of things in a brilliant sport shirt. In some instances, he wore a chef's cap with an apron emblazoned with tired wit. In an effort to keep up with the Joneses, miles of brick were laid and patios blossomed like roses. Plants said to be especially congenial with borders and brick were set out in profusion, and all kinds of cooking equipment went into the new establishment. Villainous knives and long-handled forks joined the vast list of outdoor cooking equipment, and old lanterns were hauled out, refurbished, and filled with kerosene as time turned back for the Joneses and their guests. About the time some of us others laboriously laid the last brick and stood back panting to survey the scene of our future social triumphs, the malevolent whirring of an air conditioning motor broke the summer spell. Ho-hum, said the Joneses, brought up in the family dining room, nurtured on many a moonlit potato salad. We can't ask anyone to sit outside in this heat. After all, they're used to air conditioning. So saying, they put back on their coats and marched indoors, leaving us confounded, defeated, and at long last ready to dine on the patio. And now Phil is going to follow this piece with another kind of summer memory, this one without air conditioning.
Just some background for this piece. When Charlotte Capers was a girl of 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age, she and her mother and her father would go and spend the summer at the mother's family place in Columbia, Tennessee. But her father, generally, because he was the rector of St. Andrew's Episcopal Church, which is now St. Andrew's Episcopal Cathedral, he felt responsible for his flock, and he would generally stay through the first couple of months of the summer vacation and join them toward the end. It was a magical time and place, as Charlotte describes it, and I'm going to read a section describing one of the evenings there. On an August night, we would finish supper, and grandmother and granddaddy, mother and father, and I would go out on the front porch and talk and watch the cars go by. The road in front of the house was not paved, but it was being surveyed for paving. The cars left plumes of dust behind them, and their headlights were pale yellow in the dust. The grown people would comment on the increase in automobile traffic on the Mount Pleasant Pike in the last few years. Granddaddy and Father would light their El Roytan cigars, which were not permitted inside. The smoke from their cigars would drift slowly in the summer night, and when they drew on their cigars, the ends glowed redly. They talked about when they were boys, the ladies talked about when they were girls, or about people they knew in Columbia or Nashville, and often a car would crunch up the drive and company would come in. Once the company told a thrilling tale about a prominent married man in Nashville who was in a wreck with some woman not his wife. His wife threatened to shoot them both. I don't believe she shot anyone, but this was exciting word from the outside world, and the chairs rocked faster as the story was told. One night, Grandmother and Granddaddy told about the dances they used to go to, and then they got up and did a polka by the light of the moon. Anyway, the cigars would glow, the rocking chairs would creak, lightning bugs would venture up on the porch and wink, a mourning dove would call from the fence, and sometimes the old owl in the dead tree in the Grants' yard would hoot. Much as I wanted to chase the lightning bugs, I would not leave the talk. The laughter was pleasant to hear, and usually somebody would ask Father to tell a story. One of his favorites was about Willie Mae Laughlin and her baptism. When Father was the rector of St. Peter's in Columbia, a lady called on him to ask a special favor. She wanted to come into the Episcopal Church, and she had not been baptized. She believed that the only valid baptism was by immersion. She wanted to be baptized, she wanted her 3 children to be baptized, and she would like for Father to do the job. But she wouldn't feel right if she wasn't immersed. She firmly believed that only thus could she be sure of the authenticity of her regeneration, according to Scripture. Now, Father was very broad-minded about everything but Anglo-Catholics, and he thought that if Miss Laughlin would feel better about being immersed, he would try to accommodate her. Immersion is permissible in the Episcopal Church, though effusion or sprinkling has long been the custom. Father went to his friend Mr. Legion, the Baptist preacher, and asked to borrow his baptismal pool. Mr. Legion, a hearty, fat man, agreed and said he would be glad to lend Father his rubber undersuit. Father was tall and at the time slim, and there was a good deal of difference in his girth and in Mr. Legion's girth. The appointed day came, and Father, his convert, her husband, who was uneasy about the whole thing, and the 3 children presented themselves at the pool in the First Baptist Church. Father had his vestments over Mr. Legion's baptizing suit. He began to read the ministration of holy baptism and got along fine with it until he got to the part having to do with water. Mrs. Laughlin had renounced the devil and all his works, the vain pomp and glory of the world, and had promised to obediently keep God's holy will and commandments all the days of her life. When they got to the place in the service where Father asked the witnesses to the name, Mr. Laughlin named his wife Willie Mae, which had been her name all the time. Father took her by the hand, and the 2 of them processed into the pool, where Father was, according to the rubric, to dip her in the water discreetly. When Father entered the pool, the extra space in Mr. Legion's pants began to fill with air. Father grasped Willie Mae more firmly by the hand and pressed on into deeper waters. The airy suit, now buoyant, floated upward, and Father floated with it. He lost his footing. He lost Willie Mae at the same time. Panic seized them both. Discretion was out of the question. The issue was survival, regenerate or not. When Father fought to get his feet on the bottom of the pool, the inflated rubber suit bore him up like water wings. He lunged toward Willie Mae, got her by the neck, and gasping for breath, forced her head under, sputtering, "Willie Mae, I baptize thee in the name of the Father and the Son of the Holy Ghost." By this time, Mr. Laughlin was about to come in after them. Mrs. Laughlin had gotten over any reservations about the validity of sprinkling, and Father had nearly drowned. He and Ms. Laughlin bobbed to the surface and worked their way to the edge of the pool, coughing and choking. As they reached shallow water and Father got a firm footing, Ms. Laughlin, her hair and eyes streaming, and fear written all over her face, gasped, "Mr. Capers, I want you to sprinkle the children." This always brought the house down of a summer evening long ago. Grandmother laughed until she cried, and soon it was time for bed. Now, some of you may know that Ellen recently and unexpectedly had to have her gallbladder removed. And it was while she was recuperating from that, she recalled that Charlotte had also had to have her gallbladder removed back when it was a much more serious and difficult operation and a longer convalescence. And she remembered that Charlotte had written a piece about that whole experience. And Ellen is going to now read Charlotte's story of her gallbladder surgery experience.
Yep. The title of this extraordinary piece is "Not Speaking of Operations." Since my experience with surgery, it has been suggested by friends calling on the sick that I write a piece about my operation. The implication is that such a piece would be a howl. Certainly, they always have been. My answer to such suggestions, graciously intended, of course, is a categorical no. In the first place, I found nothing funny. I can easily refrain from saying side-splitting about the removal of my gallbladder. This is a revolting illusion, but if President Johnson can mention his, I can mention mine. As the job was done with skill, and as I was treated kindly, I have nothing of special interest to report. I don't remember the operation, thankfully, but one of my friends reports that I never looked better than I did when I came from the recovery room. This is a hard way to look good, and I will probably never look that good again. So we might as well settle for my conscience-worried expression. I'm told that I behaved satisfactorily, did nothing untoward in the operating room, and came to murmuring politely, "Oh, mercy, mercy." You can't beat that for decorum. The first meal that was placed before me, or upon me to be exact, consisted of fried catfish and cornbread. I still think this must have been meant for the patient next door, but maybe not, for I ate it and got along just fine with it. In the second place, about not writing the funny piece, any minor inconveniences or frustrations incident to a hospital stay are not worth mentioning, as who knows, I might have to go back there someday. I do have a good deal to say about and for convalescence. There was one bad night when I came home, and those dearer to me than near had provided what is known in nursing circles as a sitter to sit with me. The sitter was very nice, but she walked around the house all night, went to the bathroom a great deal, and got up at 4:30 to make coffee. I crawled out to have coffee with her in the living room so she wouldn't come to have coffee with me in the bedroom and from 4:30 to 6 a.m., she regaled me with tales of her former patients, all, as she put it, a little mindless. Well, by 6 o'clock, I was about ready to join their group, so I wrote her a check in a trembling hand and thanked her for her trouble and sent her on her way. Since then, everything has been fine. I have to stop just for a moment and tell you that the two named characters that are come next are Holly, Charlotte's dog for a long time, who was known for being unfriendly and irritable, and Beulah, her long-term housekeeper and cook, who was known for being cheerful and friendly. So Beulah volunteered to take the afternoon shift, and Holly, the courageous wire-haired terrier, defends me at night. Knowing full well that I risk comparison with one of the more offensive literary creations of all time, Pollyanna, the glad girl, if I say it was all for the best, I will now take that risk. While the giant gallstone doesn't stand up prettily beside the shells of Sanibel Island, where Anne Mara Lindbergh found her gift from the sea, the effect was about the same. For the first time in my life, I've stayed away from work without a feeling of guilt. I was ordered to stay in, and that was that. So I relaxed and enjoyed it. Spring is wonderful anywhere, on Sanibel Island, in the Rockies, on the olive slopes of Italy, in any countryside, and in my own front yard. I had time to check up on all the others that live here with me, truly enough, the birds and the bees. I didn't spot any fine birds that have to be lured to the windowsill by fancy diets, but the plain marauders after hedgeberries and grass seed are surely worth knowing. Handsome blue jays, iridescent grackles, testy mockingbirds whose sweet song belies their black hearts, and the common little sparrows that live in the louvers of my attic think this is their home too. And so do the squirrels that eat up all the pecans, and an almost tame rabbit that comes up from the Pearl River swamp early in the morning and lopes around the yard. The mockingbirds must have been the first settlers here, for they have a proprietary air. They dive at interlopers walking under their watchtower on the eaves, including me, and only the mockingbirds can intimidate Holly, the courageous wire-haired terrier. While I was still at home, the redbirds began to come, and this was quite a show, all acted out under a sky as blue as the Aegean Sea. The bees are here too, swarming around some sweet flowering bush that must certainly be a volunteer, as I never pause to plant in my normal hurried routine. So the sun shines, the sky is blue, the bees are after the honey, and the squirrels and birds make about as much sense with their chatter as do a lot of people who run around in circles trying to do too many things they think they have to do. Which brings me to the bittersweet realization that my office functions just fine without me. This is a tribute to the people with whom I work, and it's also a load off my mind. You see, as I become more unloaded and more mindless, I unwind more. My batteries begin to recharge, and I contemplate only occasionally the necessity of working for a living. Another bonus of convalescence or changing pace, books. I was sent or lent Peanuts and Pogo, The Boston Strangler and Madame Sarah, The Christian Agnostic, and Playboy magazine, as well as Art Buchwald and Elia Kazan, Mary Renault's Greek novels, and The Secret of Santa Vittoria, and a lot more besides, since the giant gallstone had stopped me in my tracks. I used to read for sheer pleasure. In my job, I have to read for information. And in my time, I've reviewed a good many books for a small fee. It has been years and years since I could pile up 5 or 6 or 10 books and just read because I wanted to. No deadlines, no criticisms to weigh carefully, just entertainment. And if it isn't, I can surely put down the book. I must say that a lot that is written now isn't entertainment. But then you say, well, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? And finally, people. People like friends who rally round, turn up and stand by. People like my tenants who rushed in with the rent check on the first of the month and refrained from mentioning any part of my house that had fallen or leaked on them during my illness. People like neighbors I don't ordinarily see, like old friends I haven't seen in a long time. People who write notes and send cards to let you know that they are concerned about you. This is worth knowing. And also let this be a lesson to all of you who don't write notes or send cards, people like Beulah. But then there aren't any more people like Beulah who stayed 5 extra hours every day for 2 weeks for friendship and not for pay, which she didn't want to take. So now, if you think that I'm suggesting that you all line up and have your gallbladders out, you're wrong. I'm suggesting that a break in routine, voluntary or enforced, can be helpful. The carpool driver, the maker of beds and cooker of dinners, the club woman and the woman who works can all use a quiet time. Maybe you can manage to stop, to slow down, to evaluate, to appreciate, without an experience with the internist, the radiologist, the anesthesiologist, the surgeon, the nurses, the hospital, and the bank. But if you can't, take it from one who was forced out of the big push temporarily. Stop in your tracks. Sniff the wind. Look up at the sky. Let go. Turn loose. If you can go away and lie in the sun by the sea, by all means do so. But if you can't, perhaps you could change the lead on your canter in the same old ring. It would be worth a great deal to you if you could, because we all have what Will Percy described as a need of silence and of stars. And we surely have to fight for it. This is worth fighting for, and I couldn't have done it myself without the giant gallstone. Talk, talk, talk is about my speed. But if I can practice what I preach, friends, then indeed the giant gallstone will turn out to have been a pearl of great price. We shall see. And I have to tell you that after Charlotte's convalescence, my parents had a small gathering at our house to welcome her, back into the land of the well and the recovered. And I was the youngest person there, and I was kind of thrilled when Charlotte came in with a big smile and a package that she opened up and passed around. It was the giant gallstone. And she said she was going to take it to the jeweler and have it made into a pendant so she could wear it as a necklace. I don't know if she ever did that, but I did think of it after my own operation, and I asked the doctor at Duke if he had a giant gallstone for me, and he looked at me like I was a little bit nuts.
This final piece mentions one of Charlotte's best friends, and we suspect that it was actually Ellen's mother. It's called The Pain of It All. When one of my best friends left the hospital during my operation before she heard whether I had lived or died, so she could get home in time to see her noontime television program, I realized the grip that soap operas have on the ladies of our land. Of course, I did not realize it at the time, as I was unconscious. A couple of years later, an eyewitness told me about it. Then I wondered what the soap operas have that I haven't got. After a week of viewing, I'm thankful to say, plenty. The week of viewing was brought on by my belated purchase of a tiny color television. It is so tiny that I have to view it on my lap, and then I squint and cry because of the orange and green people so close to me. Even so, I can tell that everyone on the screen is in bad trouble. If there is anyone in the world who has not seen a couple of hours of soap opera, let me tell you what to expect. First, there's very dismal music, like a violin crying. Then a character appears, usually in a white coat, to indicate that he's a doctor. He sighs heavily. Next, a female character appears, and she sighs heavily. It is not immediately apparent to the irregular viewer what they're sighing about, but you soon get the idea that things are bad and likely to get worse. And so they do. My first sampling turned up a sighing man who had been lost ever since World War II. He wants to divorce his wife. She has chest pains. The first time around, I didn't know who was in the right, the lost man or the lady with chest pains. They both sigh gustily. Then their little girl appears. She loves them both, and she sighs a lot too. Next, we meet a father, a brother, and innumerable other relatives, all worried to death. The time between commercials is devoted to family discussions about why the lost man wants to divorce his wife. The brother, who is going blind, thinks that being lost so long may have affected his virility. What he doesn't know is the lady with chest pains was frequently unfaithful during her husband's absence and has been co-respondent in several divorce cases. The family apparently didn't miss her while she was in court. Anyway, they think she's lovely. The little girl breaks down and weeps, and a tiny tot appears and tells her she is like a flower which has ceased to bloom. At this point, I went blind too, right along with the brother, but for different reasons. His case was never diagnosed, but mine was caused by proximity to the tiny tube and all that living color. Anyway, I missed the point, if there was one, while I wept briefly. The next thing I saw was a lady in a hospital bed with a tube in her nose. I noticed in one day's viewing 3 principal characters with tubes in their noses. This lady is unconscious, but she is able to sigh heavily. A bunch of doctors come in, all kin to principal characters, and they sigh too. It seems that the lady's illegitimate son, who is a doctor, has operated on her by mistake, and another doctor has just told him what he has done. This shakes him up, and his breathing is affected, while various nurses, all kin to principal characters, try to convince him that his mother really loves him, though she gave him away when he was born. This drama fades out to the sobbing of violins or maybe cellos, and the next program opens in operating room 28. There's a lady screaming on the table with a Band-Aid on her head, and a bunch of doctors lean over her, sighing heavily. The lady continues to scream, and one particularly nervous doctor pounds his head with his fist. The scene shifts from operating room 28 to a private hospital room where a man I couldn't place was going blind. I don't think that this was the same blind man we had before, as it was a different program, but he was just as mixed up as the first one. He doesn't know how to tell his wife that he divorced her while she was on a shopping trip, and I do think that would be hard to explain. He has a teenage son whose mother is not the wife who went on the shopping trip, and here the plot eluded me completely. The next scene opens in another hospital room, and herein lies a gentleman with a heart condition who is quoting Shakespeare. His girlfriend leans over him worriedly, and he murmurs, "Parting is such sweet sorrow." The lady is still screaming in operating room 28, but the nervous doctor has come out, torn off his surgical mask, dashed down a drink of water from the water cooler, and put his head in his hands. We leave him thus downcast, and without a word of warning, we are shifted into the kitchen of another doctor whose daughter has left her bridegroom at the altar because she is afraid she can't handle his children by his first wife, and because, you guessed it, she is going blind. This is a secret shared only by her doctor, and I don't know whose brother he is. So this is how it goes, day in and day out on the tiny tube. Thousands look and listen, are moved, and leave old friends unconscious to see how it all comes out. 3 weeks or 3 years later, that same poor lady may be screaming in operating room 28. But the formula is a great success, as any wise soap seller will tell you. And a lot of ladies and some gentlemen take their phones off the hooks from 12 to 3 each working day so they can keep up with the pain of it all. The first 2 programs I watched were sponsored by Joy and Cheer. And that's the writing of Charlotte Capers, the Capers Papers. Thank you so much for coming and listening.
Yes, I had wanted to read that last one, but I couldn't do it. I read 2 or 3 sentences and was moved to tears from laughing.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.